We're now live. Sound check. General Issues Committee meeting for Friday, December 2nd, 2022. Sound check.
Good morning, Mayor, councillors, staff, and residents. Welcome to the General Issues Committee for December the 2nd, 2022. Quorum is now present, and I would like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the committee meeting. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they have additional time, if they require additional time to ask questions or make comments. As always, I will time your questions and not the answers so that you get your full 5 minutes. Madam Clerk, are there changes to the agenda this morning?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there are no changes this morning.
Thank you. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Thank you. And we'll call the question. And that carried 13-0. Thank you, Clerk. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, we'll proceed into the discussion items. 6.1 on your agenda is the 2023 recommended water, wastewater, and stormwater budget, FCS 22054 citywide. Approval of the minutes? Yes, no? Yes, thank you. You're the best. It wasn't on my roadmap, I'm sorry. May I have a motion to, that's okay. To see how we depend on the roadmap. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Wang. Thank you very much, Councillor Alex Wilson. And that vote is up. Good catch, Councillor. You're better than me already. Yes, you can get 2 votes today, only because we love you.
You're being a super Mary.
I'm not the... Now we will move on to item 6.1 on the agenda, which is the 2023 recommended water, wastewater, stormwater budget. May I have a mover and a seconder to put that item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Kassar. Any discussion on the report? Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I missed the initial meeting, but just one question on the recommended rates. It's the meter size is separated out between a 1-inch service and a below 1-inch service for residential. So my question is, when you have a multi-residential property that has a service that is larger than the 1-inch service, but each individual unit has a meter or service that is smaller than the 1-inch, what rate do those individual tenants end up paying on their water bill?
Thank you, Councillor. My staff are conferring. Director Winters, please.
Certainly. So through you, Chair Clark, thank you for the question, Councillor. It was a good one. So in that scenario, the entire property is billed based on the larger meter, and the smaller residential unit meters are simply used to split up that larger bill amongst the tenants. So they're not being, the property is being billed based on the large meter total. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Unfortunately, it raises an inequity where tenants that are living in a multi-residential building are paying a higher rate than single-family home property owners. So seeing as we're likely to pass the rate budget today, that's something that I can take away with and perhaps address in a future rate budget, because I think that that's a fundamental inequity in our billing where individual tenants, renters would be paying a higher water rate than single-family home property owners. Thank you.
Director Winters, please.
Yeah, so again, through you, Chair Clark, just a few things to point out as well. For those larger properties, the meters are in place for fire flow as well. So there's uses on the property that are unrelated to what the residential tenants are using. In a lot of cases, I know for apartment buildings as well, the water usage is included as part of the rent, so they're not necessarily paying based on consumption. But what you'll see is that the property is paying a certain portion of the overall water fees that have nothing to do with what is actually being billed to individual units where they're paying directly by consumption.
Supplemental, Councillor Danko.
No, I appreciate the clarification, and again, I think that's something to take away and address in future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next speaker is Councillor Kassar, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just had some questions, a few questions. First one is on the annual infrastructure gaps that were presented. There was water of 20 million, wastewater 50 million, stormwater 31 million. I just wanted to understand if those annual infrastructure gaps related to the risks not in budget that were presented on slide 90. Is there a direct correlation between those?
Director Winters, please.
Certainly, through you, Chair Clark. So there's absolutely a direct correlation. What I would say is that I'd mentioned during my presentation last week that those annual infrastructure deficits were calculated using the 2022 budget, which included the 10-year capital program. So we have seen our capital program increase by $330 million in the 2023 budget, which is already taking a chunk out of those annual infrastructure deficits, both on the water and wastewater systems particularly. So we already would see if we went through and redid that math that those numbers are going to change somewhat based on the numbers that we've submitted. There are other ways that they relate. So for example, we presented risks at the very end of the presentation for things that weren't in the budget. Flooding and drainage improvement framework was one. We mentioned there's $243 million that was recommended that we haven't included in the budget at this point in time. So if we were to include that $243 million, that would be triggering additional spending both for the wastewater and stormwater systems, which would apply to those annual infrastructure deficits. And the last thing I think I wanted to say on that is just a reminder that those annual infrastructure deficits, I know committee got a presentation on the asset management program last Friday. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to view it, but they are subject to change based on our future service level conversations. We do have a risk, and it did show up in that risk slide with our linear infrastructure in particular, our age of pipe, both for the combined sewer system and for our water main system. If I look at our capital program, I know we're not investing enough in the pipes to keep the average age of our pipes from growing. But we're also able to control the functioning of the pipes in a different way than our vertical infrastructure, our facilities, pumping stations, things like that. We can fix a water main. We can fix it multiple times, and in some cases do, and we can maintain the service levels. There is a balance there where if things are breaking too often or you're finding too many defects, you're spending money on repairs, which generally there's better value on replacing or renewing than dealing with one-off repairs. But we're able to control that risk. That's the message that I want committee to hear. There is the opportunity in the future, again, I think as we talk about service levels, about what do we as a city and as Public Works recommend that we balance our average age of pipe for all three of our systems. And we can have discussions about that and what impact it has on an annual capital program and a 10-year capital program. One of the challenges, though, and I want committee to understand this as well, is that if we were to ramp up our spending on replacement of linear infrastructure, water mains, combined sewers in particular, a lot of that work is coordinated with the roads program. And for a coordinated roads project where they're replacing all the subsurface infrastructure, road surface, sidewalks, the rate budget pays for 50% of that work. The tax capital budget pays for 50% of that work. So the two are linked, and if we increase spending on the rate program, then we'd end up needing to increase spending on the levy program too. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Councillor Kassar, please.
Yeah, through the chair. So the key takeaways from that are, there are infrastructure gaps, spending gaps. However, they're being addressed by the multi-year capital plan, and that the risk is also being managed so that we are not expected to not meet our service levels or miss our service levels. So even though there is a gap, it is being managed, and we shouldn't be concerned about that. Is that a fair summary?
Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark, I don't think we need to be concerned about our ability to provide water, wastewater services to the community. I do think that we need to recognize that there's better value in spending for replacement or renewal of old infrastructure than responding to repairs, but we also have to balance that with affordability for our program.
Councillor.
Thank you. So that's good on that question. I had a second question. It was just with regards to the increases. So the proposed increases is 6.49% to ratepayers. And what was highlighted in the presentation in the report was $8.3 million of the increase, which is roughly, I think, 57% of the total increase recommended, was around inflation. And I just wanted to clarify, because at one slide it said it was for maintenance budget, other it said it was for inputs like chlorine and other chemicals. So is it just overall 8.3 million is inflation for all number of things, not just maintenance and not just inputs?
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark. Just to make sure that I'm communicating clearly, the $8.3 million was the non-discretionary. $8.3 million was the non-discretionary increase that we'd identified for the operating component of the budget. And we did use two different terms, so I apologize for that in the presentation and the report. A maintenance budget essentially is this is the increase in costs we need to maintain our services like for like from 2022 into 2023. And in this case, that $8.3 million, that entire maintenance budget is related to inflationary costs, chemical, hydro, parts and materials to maintain the same service levels. There was another component of what we termed as non-discretionary operating expenses, and it was just under $2 million, so $1.97 million. And that is related to new capital coming online, particularly our tertiary treatment facility down at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's a brand new facility that we're going to run for all of 2023. It's going to use chemicals, it's going to use hydro, and that's $2 million is related to the incoming cost of that new capital. So altogether, it's $10.3 million in non-discretionary expenses, of which that maintenance component or inflation makes up a large component of it.
Right.
Councillor.
Okay, that's good clarification. So my takeaway from that is I understood it correctly. I just needed to have some of the points filled in a little bit, but that makes sense to me. My final question is just around, I think what you talked about was a change from capital budgeting from sort of a fixed spending model to a needs-based model. And I don't know if this is an easy question to answer, but as we shifted from that fixed spending to needs-based from last year to this year, can you just give a highlight of the capital projects that have been added? I know you probably covered that, just a lot to take in, and just wanted to get a sense of what is so important now that we've added. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark, I don't know that I did a great job explaining this last week, so I appreciate the question. What I told committee last week is that we had $330 million in additional capital that had been added to the 10-year program. And I mentioned kind of some big buckets that those fit into water treatment plant upgrades, Dundas wastewater treatment plant in particular, as well as some costs related to the Woodward wastewater treatment plant additional renewal work, as well as the expansion. The major changes, so where that $330 million change is coming from, we saw the budget for the water treatment plant project go from $165 million to $348 million between 2022 and 2023. And so that's a significant increase, certainly. A lot of that increase is related to new scope that had been identified in studies that either completed late in 2021 or early 2022. And we did highlight in a report to Public Works Committee this past September what some of those projects were, but I've got them in front of me here. It includes the replacement of the filter backwash system at the water treatment plant, and that wasn't a cost that was contemplated in the 2022 budget. Renewal of our filter under drains at the water treatment plant. And sorry, just to give you some numbers, the filter backwash system is a $17 million project. Filter under drain renewal is a $32 million project. Replacement of our chlorine building, there was a condition assessment done in 2021 that identified that building has some structural defects that require replacement. That's a $20 million project. Outfitting our water treatment plant with filter to waste, which is a $22 million project. And then as we completed our condition assessment work in 2021 into 2022, we identified another of I'll call them miscellaneous needs across the water treatment plant, but valves that are in poor condition, some areas where pipes need to be replaced, some electrical components, all of that adds up to an additional $35.9 million. So at a high level, you know, that $348 million water treatment plant program, more than half of that wasn't included in the 2022 capital projection for the 10-year. Out of that additional $180 million, about almost $100 million of it is new scope. And then there are some significant inflationary costs related to the existing projects in there. Our pretreatment program, which is a $100 million project, our UV disinfection, which is an $80 million project. We saw those cost estimates go up quite significantly as well. The other major component of the $330 million increase, I did mention this, was the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. So prior to this year's budget, we only had $26 million allocated to the replacement of the Dundas facility in the 10-year capital program. And I'd mentioned that decision was made approximately 7 years ago to under budget that program in the hopes that we'd be able to attract an appropriate grant program to cover the additional costs. And I did mention in my presentation last week that we're just at a point, given the state of that facility, where we need to program it for replacement. So costs have increased significantly. What was originally a $60 million project in 2015 dollars is a $140 million project in 2022 dollars. And the actual budget went from 26 million to 140 million. There's $114 million in new capital right there. Those are the biggest changes to the capital program. Certainly, we've seen some other cost estimate adjustments, particularly due to inflationary costs across a wide scope of projects.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. Just one final question then. So lots has been added now to the capital plan. Do you have a high level of confidence then that all the major capital projects are now being captured? I know there'll be surprises and things that need to be done, but just to have a level of confidence that next year we don't experience something similar. Thank you.
Thank you. Director?
So through you, Chair Clark, I'd say I have a medium level of confidence. The projects that we've talked about in some detail, those are our most critical facilities in our wastewater systems, the Woodward wastewater treatment plant, the Woodward water treatment plant, and the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. And we largely know what needs to be done at those facilities, and it's been budgeted at this point in time. I did mention that, you know, by the end of our 10-year capital program, we would see the asset grades, condition grades for the Dundas facility go from a poor to a good. For the Woodward Water Treatment Plant, go from a poor to a good, and then for the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant would go from fair to good. So that's the value of that investment that's currently in the budget. There are other unknowns, particularly on the linear system side. We haven't inspected, this actually came up over the course of the past week, unfortunately, with the Burlington Street spill. There's a large portion of our wastewater collection system that we haven't inspected for condition. So as we continue to improve our asset management programs, in-field condition assessments, instead of using age as a surrogate for condition, we could find some costs that will change the budget around. Alternatively, we could find that things are in good condition, although in my experience, that's less likely.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you very much, Director Winters. That's all.
Thank you very much. Councillors, just so that you're aware, clerk are listing the speakers list in WebEx, so that's where I'm following them, not on the desk. So if you're looking for the speakers list, and right now I have Councillor Kretsch, Councillor Francis, Councillor Wang, and Councillor Maureen Wilson. Councillor Kretsch, please, you're up next.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on Councillor Danko's question, just to get a sense from you. I know that in your response, you talked about apartment buildings. Obviously, apartment buildings are a little different, and case-by-case basis, where of course water is included in some ways. That makes sense. Get that, understand that. There are lots and lots of these quirky setups in Ward 2. And I know of examples I can think of where it is going to create a problem for people, and it's going to create an inequity. So for sure there are some inequities. We know that, however those are, I don't know how many. What kind of work's involved in really figuring this problem out and addressing it? That's what I want to understand, because I know to Councillor Danko's point of bringing this back later, great, and maybe there's some collaboration around how we all can work together to get that, to move forward to get an answer. But like, what do you see as a scope there in terms of the kind of work it would take to answer the question?
Thank you, Councillor. Yep. Our staff are conferring.
Good. Nice.
So through the chair, Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy. That's something that we'd have to get back to you on to get the specific details on how that would work.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thanks. I'll follow up with other councillors about it. We can maybe get something forward later. But I have two other questions, and they're both for, I think they're both for Director Winters, but as you wish. Whoever, there was two questions I asked last time at the conclusion of the budget process, the discussion about the water budget. And I wondered if you had any further answers on them. The first was about how we're going to deal with closing the gap when it comes to our relationship with Indigenous communities. You talked about we had lots of work to do. It's frankly an answer I've heard a lot of, and I get that, and I understand that work is there, but what's the plan to close the gap? How's that going to work in terms of an actual plan? And you said we think we have the resources in-house, if I recall, to do that work, right? So we don't need to hire FTEs to do that work. But do we have a more concrete plan? Do I need to put a motion forward to ask for a plan? Like, I just want to understand that for myself and for the public to know like what that work is and how it's proceeding.
Thank you, Councillor. City Manager Smith, please.
Thank you, through the chair. After receiving the questions and actually, as we were finalizing the operating budget, we had planned on bringing forward and ask for some more resources on the operating side. So we currently have an urban Indigenous office. We have a urban Indigenous strategy, and we're not making as much progress on it as we'd like. And some of it is, as we work and better understand and do a lot of listening, moving forward on that strategy, we're not going to rush it for the sake of checking a box that it's done. It has to be very meaningful relationship building with our First Nations partners and truly. But we are finding that with our current resources, and some of that is supporting programs like Hamilton Water, supporting programs over in tourism and culture and all those areas. So you are going to see a budget ask for some FTE increases for our Urban Indigenous office, which will include helping to support programs like Hamilton Water.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
Do you want to?
Thanks, and thanks for taking that back to do the work to have, oh, sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, no, my apologies. I'm going to let Director Winters give some bit more specifics from his program side, if that's okay.
Yes, it is. Director Winters, please.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you through the chair. I did want to clarify, because I don't think I answered your question last week as well as I could have, Councillor. My answer was very siloed from a resourcing perspective. So when I said that I felt we had the resources to support engagement with the Indigenous community, I was speaking within the Hamilton Water portfolio and particularly within our outreach and education team. But I neglected at that point to recognize that a lot of that work is going to be in lockstep with the Urban Indigenous Office, and that I knew that there were some resource complications there, which I didn't include in my answer.
Thank you, Director Winters. Councillor?
Thanks, and thanks for taking that back and reflecting on it, and I'll look forward to seeing that in the operating budget. My second question, or my last question, pardon me, third question, is about the operating budget also, I know that Councillor Alex Wilson and I talked a lot about the different ways that we can value our assets, our natural assets, and the degrading cost that happens when things happen to those natural assets. And we've been having lots of conversations about natural assets. Maybe there's even a conversation here about natural assets. So I think that that also will require an investment in terms of folks to do the work around those natural assets.
Order, please.
So I wonder if folks will need to bring forward either through this wastewater, water and stormwater budget and ask for that, or that would come out of the operating budget later. But the question I asked at that time was, do we need more resources to do that work? And the answer I kept hearing was, yep, we do. We need more resources to be able to actually do the analysis around our natural assets. So in what way is staff looking at bringing that forward as part of the budget to make sure we operationalize that?
Thank you. Director? Director Thorne, or GM Thorne?
Yes, through the chair, Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. I'll start, but then Nick will probably want to add to it. We did have the direction coming out of Planning Committee. Was that just this week? I think that was just this week. To look at doing some valuation of the potential, I would say, lost value of the green infrastructure associated with some of the recent provincial announcements. Now, that direction was specific to utilizing sort of existing resources, and I would say a bit more of a desktop research approach. So in terms of broader ecological benefits and valuation of broader ecological benefits beyond just the Hamilton Water portfolio, because it obviously does go beyond the Hamilton Water portfolio, that would be a body of work that we don't have budgeted or resourced in our work plan right now.
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
Yeah, through you, Chair Clark, thank you. I just wanted to, I think what I want to communicate to committee is that this is an area that we're learning a lot about presently. In 2021 into 2022, we had included Grindstone Creek watershed in a pilot program led by a consultant. And the purpose of that work, Director Vanderperk had actually mentioned it at the budget presentation last week, but it was a municipal natural asset inventory and valuation. And what they were looking at was if we were to replace the Grindstone Creek watershed with a concrete built system or technology to achieve the same results from a watershed management program, what would that cost? And council is actually going to get a communications update, I believe on Tuesday, with the results of that. But the spoiler is that the analysis was that that cost was $2 billion in 2022 money. And so that was a bit of a first for us learning about valuation of those natural assets. And we're considering, I know there's other initiatives out there, including the escarpment to Coots Eco Park, where some similar work is taking place. But from a programming level within the city, I guess my message is that it's early phases, we're learning, and don't think we fully understand what resources are needed to improve that program yet, although we do recognize that there's a lot of expertise available in the consulting world presently.
Thank you. Councillor, you have 1 minute, 40 seconds.
Okay. So if I understand what you're saying, I think you're not yet at the point where you think you can ask for the resources you need, because you still need to do analysis around what resources you need. So there won't be an ask for FTEs with respect to this coming forward as part of the operating budget from you folks. And if council directs you to do so through some process, fine, but like it's not coming forward yet because you don't think you're quite at the place where you know exactly how many resources you need. Thank you. I got lots of nodding heads, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Francis, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, to Director Winters. Obviously, we have a lot of, I appreciate the great presentation and the last rate budget meeting, and obviously there's a lot of fixed costs that we can't get around with inflation, but my concerns were more directed towards the 8 new full-time employees. I just had a couple quick questions about that. How does the 8 new FTEs compare to the previous years and traditional averages?
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark, thank you, Councillor, for the question. For 2022, we saw 9 new FTEs join Hamilton Water. We were predicting a need for 10 staff for 2023. We have been able to whittle that down, but we have seen, kind of an ongoing need to increase staffing levels. One, to maintain service levels. We have been lean for quite some time, and we've seen and experienced some challenges associated with that we're looking to resolve. But 2, we've seen the need and the opportunity for a number of new programs within our portfolio. And in 2022, a number of the staff that we requested and council approved were linked to new revenue generating programs, which were able to offset the costs for those positions, which is always a good news story. We are always looking for those opportunities. Can we take some work back in-house that we're currently contracting and provide better value? And we've got certainly multiple examples of that. What I did mention during the presentation last week, we are expecting to continue to see kind of that 8 to 10 FTE requirement on an annual basis. A lot of it is linked to new programs. I spoke specifically about stormwater source control as a program that we need to put into place to make sure that we're protecting the capacity of our infrastructure appropriately. I spoke about increasing capital program. It's if we have the money but we don't have the people to deliver it, then we're just going to end up with money sitting in a bank. So as we see our capital program increase, then we're predicting staffing increases, particularly related to that, as well as some system related needs as well. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor, please.
Thank you. That answers my question wonderfully. And just one more quick question here as it relates to the FTEs again. What percentage of the total budget are these 8 FTEs?
Thank you, Councillor. Director Winters, please.
So through the chair, thank you for the question. I'm going to do some quick mental math here. The projected FTE costs for 2023 are $666,000. I'm actually going to use a calculator. I'm not going to do it in my head. So that is. Sorry, I lost count of my zeros. I did my math wrong. It is less than 1% for 2023. I did want to mention if you were to review Appendix G of the report, it does give you a couple of different costs for the FTEs that we're requesting. It gives you the full annualized value for those FTEs on an ongoing basis. It gives you a net 2023 impact as well. There are two of these FTEs that are somewhat or completely cost recovered. One of them is completely cost recovered from capital because it's supporting capital programs. One is projected to be 50% covered at least from new revenue generation associated with permits. So that's offsetting impacts there. And for a number of these positions, some of them are filled presently because they were temporary positions for new programs that we've recommended that we make permanent, such as the watershed management program. Anything that's new, those have been budgeted at 75% of the annual value for 2023 because we recognize that we're not going to have someone in that position in January.
Thank you. Councillor?
Great, less than 1%, that's not very significant, but that's everything for my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next speaker is Councillor Wang, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair Clark. To, I think, GM Zagaric or Director McMullen, fresh off of this sewage leak down on Burlington Street, and now we may or may not have been told by the ministry that we need to do a massive sewer audit. Where does that money fit? Does that fit into this, or is it just some sort of, is that part of the 10 million contingency fund?
GM Zagaric, please.
So, through the chair, Mike Zagaric, General Manager, Finance and Corporate Services. As it is not reflected in the 2023 budget, if that was required in year, staff would report back with respect to if that represented, and I'll assume, a multi-year project, assuming it will take longer than the 2023 calendar year. It would be a combination of reserve funding, combination of future rate increases, and a combination of likely combination of those two financing tools.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
As a follow-up then, so all that sort of allocation will affect any type of potential sewer leaks or anything that we might have coming potentially in the future?
GM Zagaric. Director Winters.
So through you, Chair Clark. So the short answer would be yes, but I'll dress that up just a little bit. We don't know what that looks like yet. Certainly as staff, we've been talking about how do we improve our programs to do our absolute best to make sure that a similar situation isn't happening somewhere in the wastewater collection system. And we've got some ideas on that. I did speak about it at Public Works Committee on Monday of this week as part of a presentation there. There's options. I'd mentioned that the full sewer audit that's running a camera through every sewer pipe would cost in excess of $10 million, take 4 years or longer, and require at least 5 additional staff to support it. But there's other options available to us, such as improving our water quality sampling program. I did speak a bit to our sewer lateral cross connection program, which has been extremely successful in the system. And this is a similar type of infrastructure issue and may follow a similar type of investigation followed by programmed intervention if we do find things, and at a lesser cost, at a lesser staffing resource level. So you'd mentioned, Councillor, that we may or may not have received an order. We have not received an order. We have had some initial discussions with Ministry of the Environment and Conservation staff about what a program might look like to control this risk. I'm hesitant to put a program in front of a committee and council for consideration until we know what the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks is going to do. We do expect an order of some kind. And if I was to bring you a recommendation for a program and then find that they order us to do something different, then it's just going to complicate the conversation. So We're taking a patient approach. We do want to have some good discussions with our partners in the Ministry of the Environment about what the expectations are and about what some potential programs would look like and what would they support and what do we recommend as well. And hopefully we would see that reflected in an order. That is my hope. And then we'll be back in front of a committee to communicate what that looks like. And if there's additional resource needs, either financial or staff, then we would communicate that as well.
Thank you, Director. Councillor, please.
Last question then. Just so that I understand better, which pot of money did the sewer cleanup at Burlington and Wentworth, where did that come from?
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark. So again, I just want to make sure that I'm communicating clearly. There was no environmental cleanup yet. We'll have to see if through our discussions with the ministry, if that's something that's going to be pursued or valuable. We still do have some work to do with pollutant loadings and characterizing the environmental impact, which is going to help us guide those discussions. From a containment and repair perspective, though, which we have done, the $30,000, that came out of our existing operational funds. We do have, I mean, we're out fixing things all the time, and we don't know what the workload is going to be. So we do have operational funds available on an annual basis, and that's where that came from.
Thank you, Director. Councillor, please. Thank you. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to, if I could add, first of all, in light of the extremely exciting announcement yesterday from GM Thorne on our new Director of Climate Office, I recall, I'm trying to string these thoughts together, but I recall 4 years ago asking a question about whether our system could be characterized as centralized, and whether in light of pending climate risks, whether there were risks to that gray centralized system. So my question through the chair to either Director Winters or GM Thorne is, I'm very pleased to hear that we're going to be turning our heads to putting a monetary value on parts of our natural system, because I believe in the absence of doing that, it's never a fair fight, and it'll never be included. So to that end, could you walk me through that process of how our climate action plan and putting a value to this, how you would see that influencing this rate budget in the future, and what's the best case scenario of the timing of its influence, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you,
and where we make our investments.
Thank you, Councillor. GM Thorne, please.
Yeah, so through the chair, I'll maybe start with some of the initiatives that I think are that sort of, I'll call it decentralized aspects. And I'll leave it to Nick to speak to sort of how that may influence the rates and the sort of the centralized system downpipe. So there is a couple specific actions within climate action strategy that speak to this. Probably most notably is the update to what we call our low impact development standards. We do already have a number of low impact development standards built into our planning policies. Probably the most robust is the recent policies around the Airport Employment Growth District. What we are doing currently, the work started in 2022, should be before you late Q1 of 2023, is an update to what we call our comprehensive engineering standards, which would apply to all new development and integrating low impact development considerations within that. The second significant area of update that we're doing, again, right now and on the same timeline with respect to those engineering standards is with respect to our complete streets guidelines. Those complete streets guidelines were adopted by the previous term of council with direction to integrate them into our engineering standards for new development. They largely relate to what I would say are more sort of Vision Zero components, traffic calming, safety, multimodal transportation, but included within that as well is some greening aspects related to things like street trees and stormwater swales, things like that within our street network. So those I would say are key elements of that kind of the decentralized upstream kind of mitigations. With that, maybe I'll turn to Nick in terms of where that might start to be seen in the downstream impacts.
Thank you, GM Thorne. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark, thank you, Councillor, for the question. It is a complicated one. I think what I want committee to understand is that the natural asset inventory and climate change work, there's going to be a heavy integration with the asset management program working forward, and the conversations are in the very early stages for how we include those two. General Manager Thorne did speak to some initiatives that are in place that are going to link the two together, such as looking at green design standards and how do we build those into complete streets, for example, which I spoke a little bit about at the presentation last week. From an investment perspective, I just don't think we know yet. You'd asked Councillor if we have a centralized system, and I would answer that very much so from a treatment capacity perspective, because so much of the water that hits the ground in this community makes its way to the Woodward facility. And how we value different options for investments into renewal or rehabilitation. If we're taking stormwater in particular offline and away from the wastewater treatment plant and getting it to an outlet somewhere else in the community, that does serve to decentralize somewhat our wastewater and stormwater systems. And then there's the opportunities there for, well, what does that intervention look like? Is it a gray concrete type of intervention, or is it, we've spoken in the past about daylighting and things like that? Is there options for that? And so it's early days. Certainly something we're going to learn a lot about over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
Thank you. If I could switch gears, thank you, Director, and thank you, GM Thorne. On page 15 of the report, there is reference made to arrears as a consequence of, I think, in relation to water bills. And if I get asked through the chair, do we know, do we have a geographic plotting of where those arrears are being experienced? And I'm wondering, if there was an increase in arrears, is there being any study of possible levers that will enable us to continue to invest in our capital without putting certain residents at risk? Through the chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
So through the chair, Brian McMullen, again, I'll start answering that question. So yeah, no, we currently don't have a process where we map out or where those particular arrears are occurring in which parts of the city. But that's something that, internally we can look at. As far as policies go, or water arrears policies, and that's what we've been using so far is when the bill is not being paid through Electra, and then it gets transferred over to the taxes to be collected. There's no process where we go through to shut off the water. That's a process that we don't follow right now. But we can look at, if you're suggesting some additional programs, we can talk about that.
GM Zagarek, please.
Through the chair, I'll just add to some of the challenges with respect to interpreting the arrears figures. As Director McMullen identified, Electra is our billing agent, and as properties owners or property management firms fall behind in terms of arrears, those are likely a combination of electric arrears and water arrears. And when properties fall behind and are transferred over to the tax roll, so the city protects itself with respect to arrears in that those arrears are transferred against the property and it's secured against the property. However, the challenge with respect to water, wastewater, and electricity all being built together is property owners may fall behind with respect to all of those utilities. And when they fall behind with respect to all of those utilities and fall behind, for instance, 90 days, then they are transferred over, and that's how we capture with respect to arrears. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that property owners are paying for electricity, water, and wastewater. Is these arrears may reflect some challenges with respect to paying for electricity that ultimately get reflected in the water arrear accounts. And as Director McMullen, also just wanting to identify, as Director McMullen spoke to it, is the city does have a practice of not shutting off water. So if a property owner falls behind in arrears in the winter months or summer months, we have a practice, we do not shut off water. We work with the property owner and we do secure arrears against the property. So just as it relates to not creating greater hardship for property owners. And with respect to looking at postal codes to try to identify geographic areas, that's something we can take away in terms of collecting that information through Electra and see whether or not there's an ability for Electra to share that information so that we can plot for just to get a sense in terms of geographic areas where properties may be having a hardship issue with respect to meeting their obligations surrounding water and wastewater billings.
Thank you. Additional comments? Director Winters, please.
Thank you, Chair Clark. I just wanted to pass along some information from our Health and Safety Communities division as well, or sorry, excuse me, department. General Manager Burden couldn't be present today, but she did provide us with some information. I think she mentioned it at last week's meeting as well, but Health and Safety Safe Communities does administer a housing stability benefiting utility arrears program. Traditionally, there's been $3 million budgeted for that annually to help out our low-income community members who are struggling with some of those bills. She did mention in her communication that certainly they've seen some stresses on that program as a result of rent increasing. So more folks are accessing that program to assist with rent as opposed to utility bills at this point in time. And then there's some other programs out there. Ontario Works certainly as an example for assistance for the community.
Thank you. Councillor?
So thank you very much. I just want to make sure I understood what I've heard. Did I hear that because of the coupling of services in the billing, we're not able to discern when we're seeing arrears, what that arrears is in relation to in terms of the specific utility? And where I'm trying to go with this is to how are we as a council best able to dissect where the exact effect is so it better informs our policy of mitigation without underinvesting in capital.
Thank you. Director? Or, sorry, GM Zagarek.
So through the chair, I will start. And with respect to the arrears and the arrears information that you have before you are strictly water and wastewater arrears. We are not capturing electricity or hydro arrears. My point being, if a property owner is finding themselves in a hardship situation and cannot meet their obligations, given that water and wastewater are billed along with hydro, is if you have a $100 bill and you only have $50 to contribute towards that bill, there's no way for the city to know whether or not, if we had separate billings, whether they would have been able to pay their water and wastewater bill and have contributed less towards their hydro bill. I would suggest that given that the city does have a practice of not shutting off water, property owners will likely pay their hydro bill, knowing that their water and wastewater bill, their water and wastewater services will not be shut off. With respect to geographically, we can take away and work with Electra to get a sense geographically where property owners may be having challenges with respect to meeting their water and wastewater billing obligations, and then working with our colleagues in healthy and safe communities as it relates to information they may have through their community partners as to what are those contributing factors. Is it rental rates? Is it rental rates relative to income? Are there the inflationary pressures that homeowners? It's likely a combination of all those factors as it relates to some of our more vulnerable residents.
Thank you. Councillor, please. You have 1 minute, 20 seconds left.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to follow up with Mr. Zagarek, and I don't know if he needs a motion. I think, in my opinion, this is an area worthy of further exploration to ensure that we're addressing what is the real problem, while also being mindful of our capital obligations with respect to and the further future resiliency of our infrastructure system, whether it be green or gray. So if I could ask through the chair 2 things. Do you need a motion to do that, or is that something that you think you can do? And secondly, just to let you know that I will be following up with you to try and further understand so that we can maybe better dissect this real problem, both from an ability to pay while also a capital deficit.
Thank you, Councillor.
So through the chair, I would ask for a motion in that we would be working with external agents of the city. So having a motion to identify the request of council when we approach Electra or other external agents would be helpful. And if that motion is for staff to investigate geographically where there is evidence of hardship as it relates to meeting water and wastewater billing obligations, as well as we would work with our colleagues in healthy and safe communities to try to identify those factors that are contributing to that hardship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It is I think the geographic would be informative, but it's not my intent to have the geography further stigmatize or drive the policy outcome. It is trying to further understand the factors influencing those arrears primarily. So those factors can help inform future policy discussions while also leaning into investments in capital without further causing hardship. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I'll look to Mr. Garrick if he thinks professionally that geography is necessary for him to have a full assessment and to provide a full understanding of those perhaps future policy tools. And that's, I'd like to go on a second time as I have one other item I'd like to ask.
No problem. So can I suggest, I mean, there's 2 options. You can move an amendment today to the recommendations that are before us, or you can move that recommendation at council when we're ratifying the budget. The second option gives you the time to meet with staff to actually flesh out the motion, if that makes sense, Councillor.
Thank you. I'll take the second option, and I'll.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zagarek.
Okay, we're now, and we've got the councillor down for a second time. Matt, please. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, my understanding is that really the budget's come a long way in many years. Moving to a needs-based budget is really, really exciting. And I think a lot of the conversation in the room has not been in doubt of how far we've come, but I think just a shared appetite around the room is what I've heard about how we can go even further, given the urgency of the crises we're facing and some of the timeliness of particularly our natural system, which is distressingly in decline and maybe not being able to act with the urgency we require there. That said, this is new and there's a lot of process, and figuring out as legislators and those around this table where we can most help staff and intervene. We've had a lot of large conversations. I really appreciate that. It seems like different pieces are moving in different directions. I'd like to narrow in specifically with that kind of preamble said on the big picture, and I think we're getting closer, but maybe have some questions I'd like to follow up with. But specifically to the capital budget in front of us today and the Dundas wastewater treatment plant, I see in 2025, 2026, and 2027, I believe, are the 3 years where we're doing most of this funding. Could you, through the chair, could Director Winters walk us through what that decision-making process looks like in the spirit of this conversation we've been having around the urgency? Because I'm aware that there might be grant funding or alternatives potentially out there. For example, I believe it's the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as the Green Municipal Fund, and they have some projects for capital, but it has to be innovative. It has to be top level. It has to kind of clear the standards, and that's a decision our council hasn't made yet. So I'm just trying to best understand where those decision points are, because I think they impact our ability to apply for grant funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Chair Clark, thank you, Councillor, for the question. The Dundas project presently, as it's been budgeted, is split into 2 phases. So the first phase is 2025 to 2027, and the second phase is 2030 through to 2032. And the reason for that is because Dundas is actually 2 plants, and we can keep the facility running while we work on one half of the plant and renew it and replace it, and then come back at a later date and do the other half. As the budget is presently cash flowed, in 2025, we would look at getting into the engineering assignment for design related to the work there. So that is something that we would be working on in 2024 to put together that scope of work and get it onto the street into 2025 and start the engineering. So we do have a couple years before we really get into the detailed work associated with the project there. I did mention that right now we are doing a review of the available concepts for that facility, essentially going back to the work that we did in 2015 and updating it based on real capital cost estimates. We've put together what we think is a reasonable estimate, but we do need a more thorough analysis there, as well as opportunities for different types of technologies there. That's something we're going to bring in front of committee in mid-2023 with a recommendation and alternatives. And it may be that staff's recommendation is to replace that facility like for like at a cost of around $150 million. But an alternative is to go to a more advanced filtration technology, for example, and here's the benefits, but also here's the projected estimated costs. So the current strategy is to look to provide that information to council in 2023, make a decision. We could see a budget adjustment for 2024 based on that, and based on that decision, whether it's a like-for-like replacement or something more advanced, and that could adjust project timelines as well.
Thank you. GM Can, please.
Through the chair, just to General Manager Carlisle Can, Public Works. To add on to Director Winters' response, as we move forward and we start to define the input parameters for the facility, what the current flow is, what the capacity needs to be, Director Winters identified that we look at different treatment methods. One is a conventional system, which is what we have today, and we have 2 trains there. But I'm going to challenge the team a little bit to be innovative, because I think we have the unique opportunity with a smaller plant to bring in new technologies. With that view, that will drive innovation. That innovation then in turn may drive other sources or unlocking other sources of funding. There's no reason why the Dundas wastewater treatment plant could not be a center of excellence in terms of wastewater treatment. And it could also tell the story on how we connect what we do on the land how we use water, and we as a city, what happens to that water once we are done with it and we dispose of it. So we're going to look at it from that perspective. I know there's a lot in there, but it's very exciting to have that opportunity. And I think through Director Winters and his team, we are engaged in many fronts in terms of the American Water Works Association, the OPWA, and we're looking at these new technologies and what will better serve the city of Hamilton and help us get to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
Thank you. I would echo the comments that it's indeed an exciting opportunity, particularly to tell the story as well. Just this is the location of where many streams converge and enter out into Cootes Paradise. There's that story. There's also a cultural and economic significance to the canal and the Desjardins Canal where it outflows to the community. So I think I would agree. All of that's really exciting. Just to confirm what I heard regarding the work plan or how this moves forward. We're going to get some of those metrics that we need to base our decision on, so minimum standards, what we're looking for. That's coming up mid-2023, so 6 to 8 months from now. We're going to kind of hear those numbers. And in the context that we hear those numbers, we're also going to get some recommendations from staff regarding what are the various models we could use to meet those requirements, what are the options we could choose. And I've also heard a really excitement as well, a shared interest in being innovative. I just want to make sure those were the 3 points.
Thank you. Director?
Through you, Chair Clark, yes, that's absolutely correct, yes.
Councillor? We're good? Thank you very much. Thank you. Mayor Horvath, please.
Thanks very much, Chair Clark. I have just 2 quick questions. One might actually more appropriately go to General Manager Thorne, and that is the extent to which most multi-res are now sub-metered. Is that the case, that most multi-res buildings, residential buildings in Hamilton are now sub-metered?
Thank you. Director Winters?
Very good.
So through you, Chair Clark, so I would say that's not the case. Certainly there's a section of the inventory, and we'd have to bring back what that percentage looks like, but there's absolutely a large portion of multi-res across Hamilton that is not sub-metered.
Okay, so we would have an order of magnitude of that and be able to nail that down. Thanks very much for that. My next question then is around the changing in the water billing that's happening with Electra walking away from the water billing part of the business and where that's going from our perspective, and whether some of the conversation that we've had around the table here can be built into the whether we bring that in-house, whether we choose a vendor. I'm sure all of those things are being considered by staff, but it certainly seems to me that there's an opportunity to address some of the capture of information that Councillor Maureen Wilson was talking about and that Councillor Danko was talking about. So can I get a comment onto in terms of whether that is in fact possible, and when? I believe it's the end of 2024, but I'm not sure when the change in billing happens, please.
Through the chair, the mayor is correct. It's effective January 1st, 2025. That is what we are working towards. With respect to the decoupling of water and wastewater from electricity, that may provide a better sense in terms of ability to pay for water and wastewater versus water, wastewater, electricity. With respect to how the city will continue to ensure meter reading, billing, and customer service, we are looking at a variety of options in terms of delivering those services. And at AFNA, again, it's all a blur this week, there was a report and committee approved preparing a shadow bid with respect to customer service so that there would be a in-house proposal with respect to the customer service component of that service.
Thank you. Mayor?
Thanks very much. That's all.
Thank you. No further first-time speakers, so Vice Chair Danko, would you mind taking the chair? I have a few questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So when we're speaking of the 8 FTEs, and I understand that some of the FTEs are being funded realistically half year as opposed to for the entire year, I did not see anything anywhere talking about gapping. So is there any gapping within the wastewater division that can offset any of those FTEs?
So through you, Chair, so there is gapping. I just want to, maybe I want to make sure I understand the question. Is the question about whether or not the budgeted amount for 2023 could be adjusted to rely on gapping for a longer period of time?
To assist, most certainly.
So through you, Chair, yes, there will be available gapping. We do see that on an annual basis. We have a target that we maintain from a gapping perspective that becomes a component of our budget. But certainly we're seeing a lot of vacancies, so we anticipate that we'll have some higher gapping numbers again in 2023.
And that's just something for us to keep in mind also in terms of the budgeting process. Vice Chair, I'm interested in understanding better. It talked about a deficit with regards to flooding management. And my question would be, we are looking at stormwater rates possibly. Charging of those stormwater rates, will that help lower the deficit that you spoke of?
So through you, Chair, the short answer is yes. The benefit of the stormwater rate, or one of the significant benefits, is that we're going to be able to collect new revenue from properties that we're not currently collecting revenue from. So currently stormwater being billed based on water consumption, there are a number of properties across the city that don't have a water connection. They're parking lots, they generate stormwater, but the revenue that's collected from those properties for the city goes through property taxes as opposed to anything to do with the rate. So there will be new income if and when we implement a stormwater rate, and certainly that will offset potentially some of the capital program here from a rate perspective, either a reliance on debt to fund capital. We can use that new revenue to fund that. Or potentially we can expand our capital program and tackle that infrastructure deficit.
GM Zagarek, do you have anything to add, please?
Through the chair, what committee would have heard through, I believe that was at AFNA as well, through our consultant around stormwater fees, is the opportunity for a fee is to affect behaviors. And when applying a fee to a particular service, is property owners will have the opportunity to mitigate a portion of that fee through amendments to the physical characteristics of their property. And that, I would expect, would have an impact in terms of loadings and the stormwater system. So really it's an instrument to try to affect property owners' behaviors and how they align those costs to their properties.
Thank you very much. My next question is specifically with Bill 23 and the impacts on DCs. So Vice Chair Danko was chair, I believe, of the Development Charge Sub-Review Committee. When does the next review begin? And the changes to the DCs, now I understand the Premier has also walked it back a little bit to half the year where they're assessing the damage to municipalities. When would that actually filter down? Because the DCs that we've already assigned, I'm assuming we still collect those, and it's only the new DCs that would change for new development.
Through the chair, with respect to some of the proposed changes, and given there's some uncertainty with respect to very recent announcements with offsets, potential offsets, but based on the information that staff presented this week, is some of the impacts will be immediate and some of the impacts will be effective with the next development charge bylaw renewal. It will not affect the development charges, but it will require reductions or exemptions. So development charge, the charge itself will remain unchanged, but the city will have to provide either reductions or exemptions in some cases. And in some cases, those will be in effect with the change in the bylaw, which I believe we're targeting July of 2024. June of 2024. So some are effective with royal assent, so immediately, and some would come into effect likely in 2025.
Thank you. I have 3 more questions, so just keep me on target here, Vice Chair.
You're over time. I'm
Okay,
not sure
I'll
if
go on
there-
for a second time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second time speaker, Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be long. I really appreciate my colleague, Councillor Alex Wilson, asked my question about the Dundas treatment file. Through you to GM, I really am hopeful with your comments, and I love to hear the word innovation and the promise of possibility, because that in turn, I think what you're hinting at would enable us perhaps to jump into or succeed in securing funding that we might not normally be able to avail ourselves. In that timeline that my colleague was asking you about the metrics, I just want to confirm, are you stating that in 2023, this body will have to make a decision about whether we are going to try and adhere to the targets that have been set out by our waterkeeper partners, the RAP, or just, it's a loaded term, but the like-for-like targets? I just want to be clear on when that decision point is coming. Thank you, and that's my question.
Thank you, Councillor. GM Can, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I will start with the response, and Director Winters will jump in. Part of what we need to do is look at this facility and clearly articulate the future needs for this facility. It's infrastructure that will be around for 50 to 60 years, probably upwards of 100 years. As we look at new technologies, and my reference to that is it's really trying to unlock innovation in a manner that ignites what I would call passion in the industry. And there are different ways of doing things. And with that passion comes support in terms of financial support. So do I specifically know where it's going to come from right now? No, but there are a number of conversations that we are having that will lend itself to it. In addition, as we move forward, and Director Winters can speak to this, understanding and knowing the input parameters and understanding and knowing what is available to us requires, as you had alluded to, the engagement with a number of different stakeholders, including the HAPP, so the Royal Botanical Gardens, to name a few. So definitely we want to be robust in that approach and make sure that we have all the inputs. And the exact timing is retain the consultant, do the background studies, make sure that we understand where we're going and the path that we're going forward with, and then those key decision points will come back to council and committee for consideration. Director Winters.
Thank you. Director Winters, please.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So just to tack on to General Manager Can's response, certainly engagement. We mentioned a couple of bodies, HHRAP and our RBG, our partners, but of course our Indigenous partners as well. What does the community want to see for that facility? It is the intention, though, that in 2023, we would look to committee and council to make a decision about are we looking at a like-for-like replacement there that is a very well-performing facility, or are we going to make an additional investment to get us to sustainable ultra-low nutrient discharges from that facility? And we don't know what that quantum is, the difference yet. Could be $60 million, for example. So do we want to target that level of investment at that facility? And certainly General Manager Can has mentioned some of the other aspects that would be considered as part of that decision.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's going to be a very important conversation to have. And I guess my only parting comment was I think this municipality over 100 years ago led the way on innovation in our relationship to the water. And I think we have that option, and it's a choice, it's ours, whether we care to be leaders again in that regard. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Danko, if you could take the chair again, please.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you very much. We were the third municipality in Ontario to create real-time public notification of discharges of stormwater, combined sewer, and sewage. I believe we have 13 monitors currently operating that we report on. I believe there's still, I am going by memory, sorry, Director. I think it was an additional 10 outflows we're looking at. So can I get an understanding on the timing of adding those additional monitors to the system?
So through you, Chair Danko, to Councillor Clark, for some reason, this number doesn't always stick in my head either. We have 32 combined sewer overflow discharge points to Cootes Paradise and Hamilton Harbour. Currently, about 50% of those have monitoring in place to detect if a discharge is occurring. I did mention as part of my presentation last week, as well as a presentation of Public Works Committee on Monday, that we have two projects, it's actually three projects that are moving forward in 2023 through 2025 that are looking at making some changes to the combined sewer system. One of those, our real-time control phase 2 project, will go into construction in 2023. And that is adding additional monitoring at 2 points, as well as providing additional controls to decrease the number of combined sewer overflows to Cootes Paradise, which is an important intervention. And then we have a separate project that is looking at installing instrumentation at another 16 locations across our system. We're in the initial phases of that yet, so we don't have a project schedule for it, but we will by mid-2023. And the idea is that by the time those two projects are done, we will be able to identify and communicate to the public anytime there is combined sewer overflow, or combined sewage, going to the natural environment from any of our overflow locations. I have mentioned in previous committee meetings that that's not going to give us the ability to quantify in real time, measure the total volume. That's a much more complex initiative and a much more expensive one. But it will allow us to communicate effectively that a discharge is occurring.
And I think to be quite candid, the public notification process is not only meant to inform the general public so that they understand whether or not there's any risk for recreational use at that given time, but it also adds the tension to the system to improve those outflows. Without having that understanding of what those outflows are, we wouldn't be pushing to improve those outflows. So I thank you for continuing that process. And the last question I have, and then a quick comment, low income assistance. So we have a number of people who are in fixed incomes. The concern of seeing a 6.9% increase on water rates for some folks have indicated they're a little bit concerned about it because they don't have that money to pay that type of increase. What is our assistance program for folks who are low income that can't handle that additional? I know they can always conserve water, but sometimes that simply is not enough.
So through you, Chair Danko, so I have to bring up an email again here because this is not my program. But I did mention earlier that General Manager Burden with Healthy and Safe Communities is not present today. But she did provide information that the city has in place, the Housing Stability Benefit and Utility Arrears Program. So that's a $3 million program annually that looks to provide assistance to our low-income community members who might be having challenges either paying rent or utility bills, not just water, certainly hydro, natural gas as well. That's an assistance program that is available. As well as depending upon what programs folks qualify, potentially Ontario Works or some of the other government programs.
City Manager Smith.
Through the chair to council. So that program, which is a city run, as Director Winters said, there is some provincial programs if you're on Ontario Works or Ontario Disability Support Program, but for those that aren't qualifying for that but are low income and struggling. So that program we have now is city funded and city administered. As GM Burden has indicated to us, it is finding itself oversubscribed because of all the inflationary. So council does have the opportunity to increase the amount available in that to support it, along with the increase you're contemplating. That program, Jim Zagaric informs me, is partially funded by the rate program that you're considering now, as well as the tax-supported operating. So I'll let Jim Zagaric know what the current amount is, and if you wanted to increase it, what that would look like in both budgets.
So through the chair, I believe it's $500,000 reflected in the rate budget, and going forward there's an opportunity if in year a need to enhance that funding that could come before committee through a recommendation report through in consultation with our colleagues in Healthy and Safe Communities, and we could address it through reserves in year and then reflect the pressure in 2024, the investment in 2024. I would suggest it's likely an area for consideration, given Councillor Danko's earlier comment with respect to multi-residential. There are, if the objective is to align fairness to tenants in multi-residential, it may be best to do so through a subsidy program such as this because of the restrictions around billing programs. Water and wastewater bills are paid by landlords. And if there were to be an adjustment to water and wastewater rates on multi-residential, landlords would receive that benefit without any tools to require landlords to direct those savings onto tenants. So as it relates to subsidy programs, policymakers would often suggest that it is, or in order to achieve the outcomes that committee and council may wish to achieve as it relates to hardship, it is best through subsidy programs versus through setting of rates, water and wastewater rates.
And Vice Chair, would that be then through the operating budget?
Through the chair, it would be through a combination of our water and wastewater operating budget and our tax operating budget.
Thank you. So just a quick comment. I really want to thank the councillors around the table here for their probative and comprehensive questioning. I want to thank staff for providing very thorough answers and the attention that was shown around the table. It means a great deal to our staff when they're responding to some of these questions to actually see everyone listening and paying attention as we're going through it. And the tenor of the debate and questions have been excellent. So I want to thank everyone around the table. So at the moment, the water, wastewater, stormwater budget for 2023 is before us. It has been properly moved by Councillor Francis and seconded by Councillor Kassar. Sorry?
Ted raised his hand.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you on the list. My apologies. Go ahead, Councillor Kretsch.
Real quick, and I don't want hopefully this to turn into any semantic thing, so I'll do my best to ask the question just so the right way. I hear when we're asking questions about outflows, you're responding by saying outfalls. And so I just really wanted to clarify that. I think it's useful for all of us and for the public to understand are the difference between those two things without, again, a huge semantic thing, but outfalls and outflows. Is there a difference or are they all outfalls?
Director Winters, please. Excellent question.
Through you, Chair Clark, yeah, happy to clarify that. When I refer to an outfall, I'm referring to a piece of physical hard infrastructure, so a pipe that leads out to the natural environment. Excuse me, the overflow or the outflow is the combined sewage or stormwater that moves through that pipe. That's the difference.
Councillor? That's good. Thank you. Okay, the budget has been properly moved before us, and we're ready to take the vote, seeing no further comments and questions. Madam Clerk, if you could put the vote up, please. The vote is up. If anyone's having issues, just give us a thumbs up so we know. Thumbs up from Mayor Horvath, please. Oh. Councillor Nan, please. Are you getting it? And that vote carried 15-0. And just let me quickly turn my roadmap so I don't forget anything. Oh, adjournment. May I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn the movement? Moved by Councillor Wang. Sorry?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Cretch had put something in the chat to me that he does have a notice of motion.
Oh, sorry.
Is that something you wanted to do today? It's directly related to the rate budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please, Councillor.
And quickly, just that notice of motion. Thanks, Legislative Coordinator Pepperella, for reminding me I was going to not do it, but then I think it is related to the rate budget. Just a motion for staff to report back at the appropriate moment on the resources they require in order to identify, categorize, value, and evaluate the city's natural assets. So I know they said they didn't have the information yet about how to do that, and so getting a report back from staff I think would be helpful, and that's my motion.
So how are we going to track that? It's not assigned directly to the rate budget?
I'm sorry? Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. It will go on a GIC OBL. It'll go, I need to figure out what it's tied to directly. So I'm going to talk to staff, and it'll either go on the operating budget or it'll go on the regular GIC next agenda, one of the two.
Okay. And so do we need to waive the rules today?
It's going to stay as a notice today. It was
It's
put
staying
forward
as a notice?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further notices, motions? Let's have the vote on adjournment. I think it was Councillor Wang that moved it, and Councillor Jeff Beattie is seconding it. Thank you, councillors. That's one budget down.
Councillors Danko, McMeekin, and Cretch, are you able to vote? Were you able to vote? Vote for the... That's okay. Didn't come through. You just give me a thumbs up if you want.